Well, good morning, Dr. D. I'm excited today to talk to you about the philosophy of education. Why don't we start out by defining intelligence and then how we might be redefining intelligence moving forward?
Yeah, and it's great to be with you again, Kate. Yeah, I've been thinking about philosophy of education, and I don't know why. I guess I return to my roots every time I get in a period where I feel a little discouraged, maybe. I look around and, clearly we're in a time where our country is in a lot of turmoil, and there's a lot of reasons for it, but you look at it, and it's all human made, right? Everything that we encounter, in terms of whether it's crime or whether it's poverty or whether it's climate change or whatever, it's human created, right? And so it all comes back to how we're educated, how we create the future culture by educating the next generation, right? So every generation comes up and sometimes they get definitions, like you have the millennials, we have the baby boomers. I'm the baby boom generation. I kind of feel responsible for the millennial generation, right? And my daughter is part of that generation. And clearly they have some distinctive things about them that was, I think, part of not just the K-12 or K-16 education, system that they came through, but also some of the things that the family life brought to them and the kinds of things that they adopted and absorbed from the family life. But anytime there's turmoil, it makes me think about the philosophy of education and what it is that we're doing. Not only in the K-16 education system that I've been a part of almost my entire life. It's so funny. Here I am now, 65 years old. I went off to college at 18 and I never left. That's kind of the funny thing about me is I didn't know I wanted to go to college, except I was playing basketball at the time. And then I kind of realized, well, this is kind of cool. The fact that you have these libraries and books and all these things, you can just keep on learning, beyond the classroom and do things and read and meet people and do all these things, right? And so I was I call myself an informavore. I was always interested in education and learning and all this. And of course, my master's in philosophy and my PhD's in education. So I've always been, curious about human knowledge and I guess I'm sensitive because anytime I see strife or humans that are in pain or humans that are struggling, it's like, how do we create that? And how do we get past that? And then, and it's utopian in some ways, I get that. But if we don't have utopian kinds of visions, then, what are we striving for, right? I mean, because we can all just get by. So philosophy of education is really, what do we do when we're in the classroom? What is a teacher? What is it that we are trying to do? And if I ask most of my colleagues, what is their philosophy of education, they really don't have one. And they've never really thought about it. They go into the classroom, they do what pretty much they saw their peers doing, right? Their professors and how they came up through the system. And of course, most of that is about memorization. Whatever term you might be under, whether it's a 15-week term, which most universities have, or whether it's a semester kind of a thing, or how you want to talk about it. And the students condition themselves and they program themselves that they know that for 15 weeks, I've got to memorize a bunch of stuff. And then I've got to perform on some exam. And then, some of it will stick and most of it will disappear from my life. And I move on, but they haven't really learned how to put everything in some type of a context, right? And so philosophy of education in the 20th century began to get moved more towards a holistic educational model with the writings of John Dewey, right? And Dewey was very much a scholar of experiential learning, right? And that classrooms needed to include a bodily interaction, not just sort of mentation or memorization, but actually bodily interaction and what you might, as he called it, experience, right? And I think there's a place for both sides. Of course, there's a side, a place for mentation and memorization and sort of acculturation, if you will, some of the basics. But then, when I think about my own life and sort of where it's taken me, experiential, just going out and doing things has been sort of, where I've gotten my greatest lessons in life, if you will. And people ask me sometimes, how many, after all that education, 2 graduate degrees and so on, how many faculty members do you remember? How many teachers have you had that made an impact on your life? And I tell them it was probably 2 or 3 that had an impact, that changed me and made me think differently, made me behave differently, and changed sort of the trajectory of my life, if you will. So I think what's happened, Kate, in here we are in the 21st century, is we don't have anybody that we can point to that is sort of a leading light on the philosophy of education. Dewey was clearly predominant and influential in the 20th century, changed classrooms, it gave us a lot of different, Montessori schools and other kinds of things that were kind of based on some of Dewey's way of looking at the world. And I think we tend to move towards positivism, if you will, as the fallback position for education. And positivism, it basically is the thought that, somewhere there's knowledge, absolute perfect knowledge, and it gets transmitted into the head of a young student. And then they just have to memorize that and go into the world, and now they're prepared. And so what that does, in my opinion, and again, I don't like to be controversial. I don't want to be controversial in what I talk about, but I think in a podcast, you want to be honest. And so when you look at education, what's happened over time is that we have stopped trying to push people to become personal exemplars. And we have now harmonized our education so that everybody kind of leaves with the same basic, humble, modest educational attainment. And that means that they're able to go out into the world and get a job and live the next 40 years in a very kind of routine kind of a way. Maybe advancing a little bit over time. If they sat and wrote their obituary at 20 years old and said, here's what I want my obituary to say about me, right? We've stopped trying to challenge people to become their own personal exemplar. And so I think we've education has adopted humility as its primary, or modesty, if you will, as its primary philosophy. And that is, we no longer strive to push people to become the best that they can be, but rather hope that we can get them through kind of a system, and everybody comes out with it some basic some basic skill set at the end of the 16 years. And higher education is called higher education because it was supposed to be pushing people toward those higher levels of achievement. And we've lost that distinction between K-12 and the 4 years of college. It's now become K-16.
So what are the impacts of that approach to intelligence on our originators and our creative individuals out there?
Yeah, they don't have, they leave school, right? They leave because they realize, if you look at some of the great creators around us today, many of them have just said, enough of college education, and higher education. I'm just going to go out and start doing stuff. And that's the beauty of sort of what's happened in our world. You look around me, all these books and things, none of these were assigned to me by some instructor that I should read these things, right? And it's just a desire to go out and see if there's something new that I can become, and become, a personal exemplar to myself, right? And to the extent that that's, sort of my private quest. My public quest is that it has impact in a positive way for other people. And I constantly expose myself to the potential rejection that comes with taking all this personal private learning and trying to project it out into the world. And of course, when you do that, you face the potential for rejection. And so the private things that you're cultivating, the kinds of thoughts that I'm conveying to you today, might go out into the world and people say, that guy's a complete idiot. He doesn't know what he's talking about. But, that's what you expose yourself to. And of course, if you are an originator, and you try and you recognize the value of origination as part of human culture, right? That we can all originate, even in our own tiny little ways, by doing podcasts or by doing, sitting down and composing our own, music and sharing that with other people, right? And risking rejection, right? I think we've become to the, our K-16 education system hasn't created that steely resolve that we're able to go out and share our private lives with people. And in some cases, our private kinds of interests might not work so well in some public settings. And we just have to get used to that. It's the same thing for any entrepreneur goes into the world and creates a product, right? You create and you bring that product to the marketplace and the marketplace goes, meh, not interested, right?
Right.
What does the entrepreneur do, right? The entrepreneur doesn't say, well, we need to change the political system so that everybody loves my product, right? They don't do that. They go back and create a new product and try to bring that into the marketplace and see where that can be sold, right? So there's something that we can all learn from the entrepreneurial kind of perspective, that my life, my private kinds of things that I'm doing, inventing and creating, when I bring it into the public space, I'm not going to try to change the system so that my products will always be accepted. Sometimes they're not going to be, and I have to go back and adjust them a little bit, and and that's okay. So I think we can all learn a little bit from entrepreneurs. Maybe that's my intersection in my life is the entrepreneurship and innovation and all that stuff that people are constantly bringing into our world. Thank God, and intellect, right, and identity. So we all have a different identity, and mine is I'm an educator. I try to be relevant educator, and I talk to you. And we have these wonderful conversations, and I hope that other people find value in them. I can't guarantee that, but I try.
It reminds me of young children learning, right? Like biofeedback is so important to them. So they do something, they automatically feel it doesn't work. I think a part of K-16 education that's really lacking is with a focus on trying to keep in step with the rest of the world academically. Pre-K, kindergarten, first grade has become less and less about those biofeedback opportunities and less about social relationships, where you learn that, right? Like I created something, I'm showing it to you and you're not too sure what to think about it. We don't give young people the opportunity yet. So why would we expect them to then have the courage to do it as innovators in a corporate setting or entrepreneurs in an economic setting? Because that they really never had the chance to explore or create when they were young.
And fail, right? And fail. I think failure. I mean, I've got a little sticker on my office door at my university. It says, fail fast, fail often, fail fast, right? And it's just, failure is, for an entrepreneur, is just part of the pathway to your ultimate and eventual success, right? And I think we've done, in some ways, we've tried to isolate children from failure. And of course, in many cases, I think what we're trying to do is isolate them from being rejected by their peers, right? Because a lot of times our failures, in the classroom and so on, is reflected by our peers more than by our teachers, right? So they laugh at us, or because I used to get laughed at in art class, right? My art was so bad when I was a kid. But thank God I was good at math and reading and other kinds of things, but my art was terrible, right? And I just learned to deal with that. And I learned to kind of laugh along with my fellow classmates at how bad, because I really tried. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I really tried to produce good little products in art class. I just couldn't for some reason, right? I wasn't good at that. So in many ways, I think, it helped me decide that I wasn't going to be an artist, number one. And push me into the kinds of things that I do well and enjoy doing. But learning to laugh at yourself, and your own personal failures and your own personal rejections and so on, that might be a good philosophy of education that we need to begin developing, is to sort of take yourself a little bit lightly and find your path in life. We all have different skills, different talents. And for the life of me, I don't know why I'm so obsessed by this, Kate. I look at my life and I feel extremely fortunate been married for, many, many years, 42 years. And somehow I just fell into that relationship, and I fell into education, and I fell into the ability to write. And I try to understand that. What did I do with some of these basic talents that gave me this modicum of success in our society? And I'm trying to understand that. I'm trying to create a philosophy of education that is consistent with some of the accidental things that happened along my life. So we have to balance those accidental things that are part of our lives with intent, right? So if we are intentional about taking advantage of those things that are beyond our control, of which, it's like what talent you have, who knows, right? I mean, until you do it. It's just, Tony Robbins recently has a new book. It's called Life Force. And Tony, throughout his entire life, Tony Robbins, the motivational speaker, I think he's basically come to the same place as me now. I'm not going to put myself in Tony's shoes. I certainly can't. He's far more articulate, far more intelligent than I am. But it's funny that we're both at the same place at the same stage of our lives. And that place is, when he was younger, he was a scholar of something called neuro-linguistic programming. And a lot of his early books were based on this concept of neuro-linguistic programming, abbreviated NLP. And a lot of early interventions in education and therapy was based on this idea that human beings carry scripts in their brains, and that they live their lives by these scripts, right? And Tony was, he wrote his early books based on that. And he thought, well, if you just get your script right, and organize your script, you're going to be successful, right? And so people would go to his events and listen to, this, and they go home and they go back and try to rewrite their script, but they realize, just saying the right things isn't going to get me what I need in life, isn't going to get me what I want in life. Just knowing what to say and repeating it back and rehearsing it isn't going to get me there. It's about what I do. And so he comes back to the same thing that I do. It's this basic life force. It's the drive. It's the will to go out and risk rejection, risk failure over and over and over again that takes you along life's path, right? And we need to create a philosophy of education that incorporates this understanding, which only occurs to us when we become older. We realize how much of our lives were accidental and not intentional. And all we did was take advantage of those accidents along the way, And I think the next philosopher of education that is able to incorporate, because most philosophers of education, when you think about it, they're in there, and there are a few out there today, there are people that write in that genre, right? They're young scholars. They just got their PhDs and so on. And so they're writing articles and books and so on between their maybe 28 years old and 45. And they haven't yet experienced all the accidents that'll amount to their whatever they are at 65 that enables them to reflect back on everything. So it may be that Tony Robbins is now our great philosopher of education. And that would be kind of an interesting thing. But I think his work very much resonates with the intellectual virtues, because the intellectual virtues say, look, we need to look at life from a diachronic perspective, not from a synchronic perspective. And that means we look, and it's very difficult for humans to think that way. Extremely difficult for us to think in terms of process rather than just sort of static kinds of measures and metrics and so on, right? And of course, it's fine to think metrically and to think in terms of assessments, as you go through 15 weeks. But on top of that is a lifetime of growth and development. And most of us focus only on these little incremental, things. And it's the intellectual virtues and the life force that guide you over your entire lifetime, right? And the life force in Tony's world is a little different than it is in mine. In my world, it's those primordial emotions that we've been talking about. Those are the life force. Those are the things that we can't escape. That's our common humanity. And only now, with some of the research that's going on, are we coming to terms with some of that common humanity. There are some who still believe that human emotion is primarily it's referred to as the readout theory. And that is our emotions, in fact, are culturally derived. If you talk about anger, difference from rage, you talk about love, difference from romance or whatever, right? Those are clearly cultural categories, but we know, and you can feel that there's something that underlies those that we cannot control, that is unconscious, that does drive us as creatures, right? And there are some researchers that are coming to terms with some of those primordial drivers of what we are as human beings. So maybe Tony is getting there.
I guess last thoughts on the adjustments education needs to make to go from just being modestly preparing folks for a mediocre life back to human flourishing.
I think we need to accept the fact that failure is a part of education, and people need to run up against the limits of their own capabilities from time to time, and to push beyond those limits, to push beyond the fear of failure, and to steel ourselves to become our own personal exemplars. To become a personal exemplar means that you're pushing the boundaries of what you are. And you're going to say things that others will disagree with. You're going to do things that others will disagree with. You can always apologize. You can always come back and become a better person as a result of the failures in your life. One of the intellectual virtues, of course, is reflection. Everything we learn is a function of reflection. Everything, every move that we make is something, and it's instantaneous. In your instantaneous behaving, right? So I'm speaking to you now, I'm reflecting upon, while I'm speaking, I'm reflecting upon the words I'm using. Sometimes I think to myself, why did I say that, right? It just came out. And sometimes I think, oh, that was pretty smart, right? But that's how you learn. You learn through this constant reflection and feedback, whether you know it or not, it's happening. And to cultivate that ability to reflect upon failures, to reflect upon inadequacies, to reflect upon the imperfections that we all have, is something that we've neglected in education. That's the life force, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's got to make corrections or else it's going to go
in
a different direction.
Course corrections, absolutely, yes.
Yeah. Well, thanks again for another interesting conversation around the philosophy of education. Looking forward to connecting next week about something. I'm sure we'll have something interesting by next week to talk about, because it seems like every day there is things happening in education and the news. So this also is very relevant in terms of contextualizing the human experience right now. So I appreciate it, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Kate.